All right, thank you very much for joining us here today. My name's Anthony Borton, and you're here joining us in this GitHub InFocus event. The topic of today's talk is accelerate your time to market by building a DevOps powerhouse. Let's go to the next slide. And what you'll see is I'm joined today by someone that many of you probably know. You've probably seen him at other events along the way. But Damian Brady is a senior developer advocate here at GitHub and has been working in the DevOps space, both in Australia and internationally now for many years. So rather than me talk too much about it, Damian, would you like to introduce yourself, please, sir?
Sure. Thanks, Anthony. Yeah, really good to be here. I always love talking about DevOps. So when Anthony asked whether I could come on, whether I'd be interested, yes, it was a very quick answer. So as Anthony mentioned, I've been working kind of in the DevOps space for, depending on how you count what DevOps is, I guess, for about 10 years or so. So prior to working at GitHub in developer relations, I worked at Microsoft. You may know the team that I worked at in Microsoft under Donovan Brown for a number of years. And then prior to that, I was at Octopus Deploy, which is a deployment automation team. Did a bit of developer relations stuff then, but also cut a bit of code. Then before that, I was in consulting around Agile and all of that kind of peripheral stuff to do with software delivery. You know, the whole idea of getting your code from, you know, an idea all the way into production. So in that respect, I've been in the DevOps space or the software delivery space for well over 20 years. Oh, sorry, well over 10 years. And I've been a dev for about 10 years as well. So yeah, that's me. I've been in this space for a while. Cool.
All right. Sorry, we just went a little bit frozen there for me. I apologize. All right, so let's go on to the next slide there. So as far as our session goes here today, it's very much like a fireside chat. And that means that we want audience participation. We are really excited to have questions from the audience. It's a ask us anything DevOps related kind of session. So get involved. You'll see in the Goldcast system that there's a chat window. So go in there into the chat, just introduce yourself, just say hi, that'd be fantastic. Hey, you'll have plenty of your peers in there as well. So that would be wonderful. There's Q&A. So by all means, raise your hand, ask a question, any burning question. It could be in response to something that you hear Damien and I talk about. It could just be something that you'd like us to talk about. We've got a bunch of topics, a few questions already, but please, to get the best value out of your time with us today, we'd love to see some questions. We'll also have just a quick poll straight after this. That's just to get everyone to get in there, get a bit interactive, give us a little bit of feedback, make sure everything's working there. So definitely get into that poll in just a moment. And then the last thing I'll talk about is if you want to learn anything more about what we've spoken about today, if you'd like to see any of the capabilities or features of GitHub, you can go into the top right-hand corner, and there's a little button there, and that button says request a demo. So if you wanted to go ahead and click that and request that demo, that's something we're more than happy to arrange. So I think, Damien, the way I think we should kick this off, let's get started with a poll and see how many people are going to respond there for us. All right, let's go to the poll.
There we go. It sounds like you might have a little bit of a delay on your side as well, Anthony. So if there's gaps, I might try to fill these. But this is the first poll. If you have a look in the poll window next to chat, you should see there's a poll that you can answer now. Ooh. This is a pretty quick one, I think, Anthony, right?
It is a pretty quick one.
Cool.
All right. We get to see the results before the audience. This is amazing, Damien.
Oh, do we? Oh, that's great. Oh, we can too. So you were going to ask me what my prediction was, but there's no point doing that now because I can look at it.
Exactly. How about another 30 seconds, or maybe I'll be a bit less generous than that. And we can build anticipation. Quite amazing to see.
Yeah.
Let's have a look at this.
It's a pretty interesting result, and you did say we haven't done it yet, but there is a hasn't it gone exactly the way that I thought it would?
No.
You just let me know when it's time. I'll stop sharing my screen.
All right.
And then
it's changed a little bit while they've been listening. All right, let's wrap that up. Let's see the results. Let's share the results with everyone.
So there you go.
It changed. I saw that full CICD was tracking a little higher there initially. So what are your thoughts on what you see there?
I was not expecting it to be thirds, to be honest, and it's approximately thirds. I thought that a CI would be higher, and or probably the highest, and then the full CI/CD would be a lot lower. It's actually very impressive to see the leading stat there being the full CI/CD. I can certainly remember not very many years ago, the opinion I got from the industry was nobody really had this full CI/CD system running. But so it's good to see that that's the leading one.
Yeah, excellent. All right, so there's certainly, I was going to say room for improvement. That's not necessarily what I'm going to say, but having been involved in the industry for many years, I've done my fair share of manual deployments where you've opened a Word document, you've had the little list of them here, and you just cross your fingers that you're not in a rush and you remember to do it on each member of the cluster. I would never want to go back there again.
No, definitely
All
not.
right, well, how about we get started with some questions? I'm just going to have a little peek here. Do we have any questions coming in from the audience to kick us off yet? Not yet. They're all too shy. That's all right. We'll get them started. So one of the first questions that I guess I wanted to put to you, Damien, let's dispel the myth that DevOps is just about CI/CD. I mean, I guess our poll then was really asking about continuous integration, continuous delivery, but it's more than that, of course. But I do, in my experience, both internationally and here in Australia, it's not uncommon to come across teams that say, oh, yeah, we're doing the DevOps. And then you find out that they're really just doing a CI/CD, sometimes very basic, using things like it could be GitHub Actions, Azure Pipelines, Jenkins. There's another one that, what's the other one I'm thinking of, Damien?
You're putting me on the spot. Yeah. There's a few of them. TeamCity is the other one that I come across a bit. Circle CI, is that the one you were thinking of? There's
And
a few others.
There was a little freeze there. I was setting you up for Octopus Deploy.
Oh, right. Yes. Well, that's the CD part. Yes, definitely Octopus as well.
Agreed.
Yep.
So what would you say to teams that think DevOps is really just CI/CD?
Look, so I don't want to discount CI/CD at all. That is a huge part of the whole software delivery lifecycle, and it's incredibly important that you have this good automation story. There's great surveys and literature out there that demonstrate that having a good automation from all the way from your code being committed all the way through to production is extremely important and correlates really well with great outcomes. But that's really just putting stuff into production, right? Yes, you have your tests and all of that kind of stuff to make sure that you're not introducing bugs into production, but you still don't know whether you're necessarily introducing value into the system. There's a few things that are missing from just straight CI/CD. So I can put a new feature into production, and if I have a great CI/CD process, I can make sure that there are no known bugs. I'm checking against bugs, that everything's performant. There are no security vulnerabilities if I'm doing some decent DevSecOps. But what I can't tell you is whether people who are using that are actually going to find it valuable. I also can't really, just based on that CI/CD pipeline from commit all the way through to production, I also can't tell you how quickly I can remedy anything that is going to come up. I may not even know whether there are issues that are in production. If that's all I'm doing, I'm just delivering stuff to production. So you're missing a few things, like the measurement of whether something is actually valuable to the end user or to the business. You're missing whether things are working as expected in production. And you're also missing the whole cultural side of DevOps, which is, an attitude of trust between the developers, of ownership of the stuff that goes into production. So if something fails in production, whose fault is it? That's quite a common thing in a lot of organizations, and that's not really what DevOps is about. DevOps is about, getting the right stuff and providing value, putting that in production. So I rambled a bit then, but the ultimate summary, I guess, is CI/CD super important, but you've got to make sure that your focus is on delivering stuff that's valuable and stuff that is providing what people need into production. And that may include noticing when something isn't right and being able to remedy that quickly as well. Yeah. So culture is the main thing there that I was talking about as well. And I think I'm getting the impression that we got a little freeze then as well. So that culture is probably the hardest part of DevOps. And I think that CI/CD is great. You can learn about these things from any number of places. You can use any number of tools to do the CI/CD part. But improving the culture of an organization is a hard part. So maybe we should drill into that culture side a bit, Anthony.
Yeah, look, absolutely. While we're talking, I will take a second just to introduce Daniel. Daniel is helping us. He's our moderator. I should have introduced him at the very, very start. He's a wonderful solutions engineer for GitHub, and he is there looking out for questions from the audience. So by all means, have a chat with Daniel. I think he's introduced himself now in the chat or the Q&A window, so take full advantage of that. Now, as we move on to culture, I guess I've always found culture is one of the biggest, most difficult challenges. You and I both have history working for companies that make DevOps tools and products. It's like, hey, get these tools, of course, but really it's always going to be culture that'll be the most difficult thing. Something I also found is frustration among teams that want to do a DevOps transformation, that want to change the way they're working, but are often impeded because maybe senior leadership doesn't buy into it just yet. The part two to that comment might be that they're given a very short window. Okay, you can try this DevOps. You've got a month. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that is a super common story, and I know you've seen this over and over again as well. But yes, I get that impression as well. So, kind of going some way to convincing people that this is a worthwhile endeavor. There's a number of ways that I kind of suggest that teams address it. The first thing is don't boil the ocean. Don't try to, exactly like you said, don't say you've got a month to implement a complete end-to-end, DevOps lifecycle plus change the culture. And if that doesn't work, we're just going to go back to the way it was before. That's just not going to work. Part of DevOps and part of even Agile, part of that software delivery stuff is the whole idea of continuously improving. So these are the three fundamental parts of DevOps that Gene Kim talks about a bit as well. And one of those is that culture of learning. So being able to make mistakes and learn from those mistakes needs to be a really strong part of it. So yeah, if the messaging comes from the top and says, we are going to do DevOps now, you have this much time to implement it. We've bought you a DevOps solution. Here's a tool set. That means we're going to be good in a month. It's really not how it's going to work. My suggestions would be to start small and continuously improve your end-to-end kind of life cycle and improve one thing at a time. So to quote my previous boss, Donovan Brown, look at what hurts the most and fix that. And then look at the next thing that hurts the most and fix that. So that combined with actually trusting your people to to improve things and to be doing their best, I guess, is a way to get that going. Now, if management is not, as flexible with that as you want them to be, so in other words, they just say, no, we've got this timeline, we've got a month, you do this, you do it all in a month. I think the literature is in about this stuff. So there's the State of DevOps report. There's plenty of stuff from McKinsey and Gartner. Managers love big, thick reports that you can just throw on their desk. They will all support that idea of doing this gradually and slowly building your capabilities up to get to a point where you're doing your software delivery really fast. The statistics around why this is worthwhile as well are extremely compelling. And one of the reports that I always refer to is the State of DevOps report by the ones from about 2019, I think was my favorite year, although they're still going on. Gene Kim, Dr. Nicole Forsgren was leading it, and Jez Humble, I believe. One of the stats from there was around a correlation between a mature DevOps culture and a company's own metrics about whether they've succeeded. And there's a correlation between a high-performing DevOps culture in an organization and how well that organization performs based on its own measures of success. So we're not talking about obscure things like this is how fast you can get code into production, although there's obviously correlations there. We're talking about real, this company's revenue over this period of time, or even things like employee retention. DevOps, a high-performing DevOps culture that has a really good DevOps environment is correlated with a lower, what's the word I'm looking for? A lower rate of people leaving to go for other companies, go and work for other companies, which, especially in the US, is a serious issue right at the moment. So all of these things, like that literature is in. You can just find one of these reports, look for a State of DevOps report, look for a Gartner report, look for a McKinsey report, any other number of those, print it out, throw it on a desk. They'll support not just the fact that DevOps improves the company outcomes, but these are the ways that you can do it. And it's gradual. It's not a pick up everything, change it all, and expect to get success.
Okay. I just want to amplify one of the things from your talk that really stood out to me. It was that quote from Donovan Brown around, if it hurts, do it more often. I look back in the early parts of my career doing those manual deployments with Word documents and grumbling every time I did it. And I did it again, and I did it again, because the mindset was just do it as quick as you can and get back to the interesting work. With the DevOps mindset today, I just imagine how different that could have been, how we could have replaced that Word document so quickly over a period of time compared to spending a year grumbling. But I have some questions from the audience for you.
Fantastic.
All right. Well, the first one's a little bit long. So when a project starts, we create a main branch. From the main branch, we create feature F1, let's say.
Yep.
Now we want to start creating CICD scripts from feature F1, but GitHub Actions don't allow us to create a workflow from a branch other than main. Azure DevOps is better at this aspect. I've always asked this many times, always checking into the main branch for actions don't work with the agile way. All right. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So there's a benefit, obviously, of having your build definitions, so your CI living alongside the code, and it is that if you change the way you build your application, you can change that alongside the code that you've changed. But the point on it's only the actions running in main, or only the workflows that run in main. I'm not 100% sure on that one. Do you know if that is the case? I'm just going to assume that it is, unless you tell me otherwise.
I believe that's the case. I'm not 100%. So that might be something we can research.
Yeah, we can research that. But the other thing that you could do, I guess, is fork that repository rather than create a branch. If you need to change the workflow, which presumably is not going to happen on every single feature branch that you create. If you do need to change the workflow, forking to another repository so you can really have your own freedom with that workflow is probably a good idea. That said, if you are using Azure pipelines right now, and this is a feature that you value a great deal, my suggestion would be to continue using Azure pipelines. I mean, if this is a feature that is solving a problem for you, and it's in one product and not the other, then that kind of answers itself from my perspective. I do want to just jump into that last little part that you mentioned about always checking into the main branch, always committing to the main branch for actions. Doesn't work with an agile way. And I don't want to say I don't think that's correct, but I think there's a bit of nuance to that. I'm a huge fan in the agile system of being really, really close to your main branch. And that means, yes, feature branches are a great idea, but having them very short-lived, so really small feature branches that don't stray from main very long and don't stick around very long is a great idea. Pull requests back into your main branch to make sure that everything is being merged really regularly. Great idea as well. But for smaller teams, and I'm probably going against the grain here, for smaller teams, I don't hate committing directly into the main branch, provided you have decent checks and balances, decent CI systems as well. For smaller commits and smaller changes, I don't mind working against the main branch primarily. I think that's probably more agile, I guess, more fast moving if everybody's committing to the same code, as opposed to long periods of work in a feature branch that get merged in, several weeks or a month later. That seems to be, in my mind at least, a bit more waterfally, I guess. Go away, do some work, and then come back. So yeah, my preferred way, I guess, is really short feature branches and pull requests back into the main. But I don't hate committing directly to main or pushing directly to main, especially in small teams. Yeah, probably going against the flow on that one. But
oh, no, I think that makes some sense the way you've described it there. The next question here, I noticed there's been quite a few answers already as well in the chat window. But it says, hi guys, what are the open source tools for DevOps that you recommend?
Open source tools for DevOps. So that's a great question. Let me think. So I know, one of my favorite things to use in a project is feature flags. There are some great open source feature flag tools that you can use across different languages. I'm having a mind blank on the actual one that I'm thinking of, but there are, if you have a look for open source feature flag libraries, there are some great ones there. In terms of open source, I mean, working with open source is a thing that GitHub does very well. Open source tooling, though, it's a bit difficult because most of my DevOps tooling is Azure pipelines or GitHub Actions, and parts of that are open. Parts of that code base is open source. So, for example, the runners, the actual actions themselves, or the tasks themselves, and the runners themselves in pipelines, those are open source, but the engines behind them, not necessarily. I'm giving a terrible answer to this because I can't think of anything off the top of my head.
No, that's perfectly fine. There are some interesting tools listed by some of the other attendees that are listening in. But I've got something very exciting here. We've got actually a video Q&A. So let's go across to the video Q&A and hear from Bella. Ooh, okay. Have approved that.
Q&A video. I'm just seeing an end button.
Me too. Okay. I'm I'm going to go ahead and just click on end for the moment, and I'll see if there's anything interesting I can come back to on that one. All right, so let me go back to another question here.
Sure.
Would we get a sandbox or test console for creating and executing actions and workflows without committing them to the repository?
Really, really common question. The short answer is no, there's nothing built into the product that lets you do that. However, there is a tool, and I'm gonna blank on this as well. I'm gonna do a little search while I'm talking. So let's see if I can multitask. There is an open source product. There you go, Necdos Act. So this is a project that is really useful. I'm just going to put that in the chat. This is a project that comes from the community that allows you to run your actions workflows locally on your local machine. Now, the difficulty, I guess, with running these on your local machine is we have quite well-defined hosted runners, for example, that have certain software. They expect things in a particular place. They have a very specific setup. If you're running these actions just locally on your machine, there may be aspects of it missing. So this project tries to recreate them as much as possible, and it does quite a good job in a lot of cases. But it may not pick up everything that you're doing. So yeah, there is, I believe, as well in actions. Now I'm going to just do this in the background as well, because I want to make sure that I'm giving everybody the right information. I believe there is something either here or coming, and Anthony, you may know, about testing an action before actually committing it. Let me see if I can. And apologies for this. I've just got another screen I'm just going through. I just want to make sure I'm giving everybody the right information. It may be in the future, and hopefully it's something that I'm allowed to talk about. Where in the future there will be a way of checking, I guess, whether a pipeline looks right, or not a pipeline, a workflow looks right before committing it. I'm not seeing it in my account that's got everything turned on. So I'm just going to assume that that is a future thing that you should probably look out for, and hope that I'm not going to get in trouble for leaking that information.
But there's no one watching. It's not being recorded. You're fine.
Yeah, I'm good. What do they say? Ask for forgiveness. Yeah.
All right, mate. I might have another question for you. The DevOps roles are some of the most in demand and highly paid in the industry. Do you think it's a requirement to have a highly paid DevOps consultant or employee for effective transformation?
So short answer, I'd say no. I don't think it is a requirement. It can certainly speed things up, I guess, for teams that are unfamiliar with DevOps practices in general. However, I'd say don't discount the domain knowledge that your team has as well. So a DevOps consultant who's done a lot of automation, a lot of deployment, a lot of infrastructure as code and all that kind of stuff, they can definitely bring that kind of knowledge and that kind of expertise and those skill sets to your organization. But they haven't worked on your product before. They don't know what your code looks like, how it runs, and how it works. So that is extremely useful knowledge. If you work on that premise of finding something that's that hurts and fixing that, and then finding the next thing that hurts and fixing that, it's relatively easy to, or not, I won't say easy, sorry, but it's relatively, it's entirely possible to learn what you need to know as you go if you're just improving these things one at a time. So I would say I don't think it's vital that you get a DevOps consultant or a DevOps expert in your organization. It can certainly help for organizations who haven't done it, but it is something that you can learn and improve as you go.
Okay, excellent. So I've got the next question here. I've noticed it's gone a little quiet in our Q&A section there. So folks, please throw some more questions out there for us. This one is, there are many vendors out there claiming to provide DevOps tools or platforms. Do you need to buy or update your tools in order to do DevOps?
I would say no. I think I've already kind of touched on this a little bit, that if there is a tool that you're currently using that solves your problems, I would recommend continuing to use that tool. It's a really common thing in our industry, I think, to look at the new shiny tool set or the new shiny platform or framework or something like that and want to change. But I think there needs to be a bit of pragmatism around whether it's worthwhile making that change. Now, the flip side of that, obviously, is that if your tool set is lacking in a particular way, or if there's something you'd like to do that you can't do with your current tool set without, horrible workarounds or writing a whole bunch of your own code, then that's probably a good opportunity to have a look at what alternatives there are. I've seen very, very effective DevOps practices and DevOps processes in organizations that are ultimately writing and maintaining their own scripts. They're not really using anything other than command lines. Obviously, there's a lot more work involved in that, but in a lot of these cases, the work has already been done for building that application, for running all the tests and all that kind of stuff. To reproduce that in a new tool set might be a lot of work that doesn't give a lot of benefit, apart from being able to say, this is your new tool set. There is a limit to that, obviously, though. If you are spending a huge amount of time maintaining all of your own custom scripts and your own custom work like that, that is time that you could probably outsource to something like Azure Pipelines or GitHub Actions. Where GitHub Actions, for example, the Actions team makes sure that we always have a newer version of the operating systems that it runs on, a newer version of the libraries that you might need, and we test those things quite thoroughly, so you know that when you actually go and build the latest .NET framework using our hosted runners, that all of that infrastructure is in place. You don't have to worry about that side so much. So yeah, that's I guess kind of down in the weeds a bit, but the short version is, don't change just for change's sake. I think look at what the offerings are and look at how these things can help you and what you might be lacking in your organization or your process. And if these tools can help you, then that might be a good opportunity to have a look.
Fantastic. Great. I've got another question here. This might be a little bit specific. So I'm not sure if you happen to have experience in this area, or potentially maybe someone listening in might have. It says, I am totally new to using GitHub. Is there a good source for me to check or existing repository to do automation on WordPress like WP-CLI? I've personally not tried to do any WordPress automation with Actions, but
I haven't. However, Actions is great for doing anything in response to anything. So we talk about GitHub Actions as a way of doing CICD, and it's a great CICD platform, but it's also good for just doing stuff, I guess, in response to other stuff. And that means you can use any of the, I think we're getting close to 14,000 actions in the marketplace now, so you can use any of those. And actually, while I'm talking, I'm just going to have a quick look at the marketplace to see if there are some WordPress ones. But so you can use any of those actions, but you can also just run something from the command line. So if you are using WP-CLI, which I assume is a command line interface for WordPress, you could quite easily call WP-CLI from a step or from a task, in a GitHub Actions workflow, which kind of gives you the power of that CI/CD, but the power of that automations platform, but also using whichever tools you have. So I'm just doing a really quick search for WP-CLI, and there's nothing there. By the way, if you wanted to have a look at this as well, github.com/marketplace, and then you can search. So I've got 28 results for WordPress in Actions. I can't see anything specifically for WP-CLI. However, there's some for deploying WordPress. There's some for vulnerability checks, tag cleaners, WordPress pot file generator. I don't know what that even is. So, I mean, you may find something in that marketplace that can do what you want it to do. But if not, you can always just run a command line. Now, if you need tools installed, you can either install them as part of that workflow. So pull down an executable and then run that as part of your workflow. Or you could use your own kind of self-hosted runners and run it on your own machine, even your own WordPress machine, if you need to be right there on that same machine. And the actions workflow will run on that WordPress machine, which means, it's just like typing in commands on that local machine. So definitely options for that.
Okay, fantastic. Well, hope that answers Eileen's question. The next question we've got is, according to you, what are 3 critical principles to consider when moving code to production for the first time?
Right. 3. I'm limited to 3. All right. 3 critical principles to consider when moving code to production for the first time. So my ultimate one, and I hope this doesn't incorporate everything else I'm going to say, but my ultimate one is to be as sure as you possibly can that the code that you're going to end up running in production is the same code that you've tested. So this was a principle that I became very fond of at Octopus Deploy, the idea of build once and deploy many. So when you have your code and you compile it as part of your CI, your continuous integration, you'll end up with these deployable resources, these things that you can actually deploy to a server. If you want to make sure that they're going to run okay in production, you should try and deploy those artifacts to a production-like system. Now, I say production-like because you're never, ever going to get a test server that works the same way as production. The specs might be identical, but the users aren't real production users. So, you're never going to be at a 100% match. However, if you're using that same artifact, deploying it to a system that looks the same, as much as you can tell, then you can be relatively sure, I guess, if you run the correct tests and some comprehensive tests, that when you put that same resources or those same resources into production, then it's going to work the same way. Now, using containers and things like that is a great way of doing that because you're deploying, some level of the infrastructure alongside the code. So you know that it looks the same when you put it in production because it's the same container. So that would be one critical principle. If you're putting it into production, try to test it as close to production as you possibly can. The next principle I'd say is make sure you have a rollback or roll forward option. So my preference is if something goes wrong in production, you can fix that problem and put a new version into production to fix that issue very, very quickly. But rollback is a real situation for a lot of organizations. So if you put code into production, what happens if that goes wrong? Can you roll back? And that's not just as simple as deploying an old version of the application, because you may have new data. So you need to consider that when you're moving to production as well as you possibly can. Obviously, that first suggestion mitigates that a little bit. If you know it's very, very likely to work in production, then hopefully you're not going to have to roll back. But things always go wrong, so you need to at least account for what happens when you're doing that work. And that final critical principle, it doesn't even sound like I'm coming up with these off the top of my head, does it? It sounds like I've said this before. The final one I would say is try to maintain a culture of trust and ownership, I guess. So when something goes into production, it shouldn't be a case that you put it in production on a Friday afternoon and then the person who has to deal with any repercussions is whoever's on call over the weekend, and maybe I'll look at it on a Monday, right? The deployment to production, if I write code that ends up in production, I should be responsible to a large extent for making sure that that code is what it should be. It's solving the right problems. If something goes wrong, I should feel ownership over what is in production. This really goes with that DevOps mindset of everybody working towards that same goal, rather than I'm writing code and then passing it over the fence to the ops team who can deal with it when it goes wrong in production. So there you go. How are those for 3 principles?
I wasn't counting, but I assume that you did 3 well. I remember telling the story about before moving to GitHub while I was at Azure DevOps. I remember telling the story many times about how empowered our feature teams were. Each of those teams owned everything from talking to the customers, the design, the security, the deployment, the operation, building the features, you name it. And that really goes to your point of ownership. And when people heard that they also did production support, they were a little surprised. But what I learned with the culture was that they had that ownership. They were truly invested in the best experience for our customers. And if there was a problem in production, they really wanted to know about it quickly because they wanted to get it fixed. It was that pride in the work that they'd built and developed themselves.
Exactly. And it comes down to not ownership, but kind of feeling like this is yours rather than you're just performing a task. Like this is the thing that this is the thing that you're building, and it's not just ticking some things or moving some cards from one side of the board to another. It's about solving a problem for a customer. There's a lot of great stuff from Gene Kim, and you might have heard. I love Gene Kim. I think he's one of the best kind of DevOps cultural advisors. I think, I don't know whether he call himself that, but some of the work that he's done, especially around his more recent one about the 5 ideals, a lot of that kind of comes into play here as well. That first ideal of locality and simplicity, which he talks about, which is basically, can I make this change and see that change go all the way through to production? Or, it's saying that the reverse bus factor, which is, the coffee factor. How many people do I need to talk to in different departments to get something working? Ideally, I don't need to. I have the ability to make that change within, my immediate sphere. And then all the way through to that 5th ideal that he has there, which is customer focus. So that should be your aim, like the customer being happy, not, you moving a card from one end to the other. Anyway, I can clearly go on about this for hours, but we shouldn't let me do that.
Well, this is a short, sweet question that just came in that I really like the look of. I'd love to hear your opinion. Do you think you should have a human or humans in the loop going from pre-production to production?
Ooh, I think it depends on what you define as pre-production. So if your pre-production environment is simply an area where you need to do a smoke test to make sure that all the parts are running, then I don't think you necessarily need a human there. So for example, having I'm relatively familiar with Azure, but I know this principle exists in a lot of places. But an Azure web app you can deploy to a slot, so to a staging slot or a pre-production slot. And then you can hit that URL and make sure everything's up and running. And then you can just swap that slot with the production one. So the URL basically just starts pointing, the production URL starts pointing to the other one. I think that process of making sure it's all running and then flicking the switch, I don't think that needs a human. I think that can be a curl command if you really want. But if pre-production means a QA environment or a staging environment or something like that, then I think having human eyes on it makes sense. I love to see that happen as early as possible. So there are great automation. So you can set up some great automation with things like pull requests, where if you make a change to the code and you submit a pull request, as part of the checks that run for that pull request, you have an actions workflow that will compile that code, build the infrastructure, and deploy to an environment where you can, or anybody who's looking at it can actually go to that URL and see the changes that you've made and then say, okay, that looks great, I'm going to approve that. In that case, really early on, I think it's a fantastic idea to have human eyes on it. But as you get closer to production, hopefully the people who have needed to see those features and see them running, I think they can be taken out of the loop a little bit. Yeah. So it depends on your definition. It depends. There's the consultant answer.
Oh, nice answer. All right, there's another question here. Hopefully they've been a little bit patient. Is there any open source project or tools which provide CI/CD for Android and iOS applications? Ooh, have you come across any of those?
Open source projects or tools. So I know you can build Android and iOS with actions and with pipelines.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, you can absolutely use those ones. I think all I'm coming up with really is the stuff that writing Android and iOS applications in C#, for example, was open source, I believe, originally. And I'm blanking as well on the name of that product. But yeah, open source CI/CD tools for Android and iOS. I don't know any off the top of my head. There is a chat though, if other people do know that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah. I'm not going to give a great answer. I can see already in the chat that Akif Ali Khan has said that he's worked on Android and iOS. Xamarin, there you go. Thank you, Dwight. How did I not remember Xamarin? There you go. Yeah. So, I mean, the short version for writing Android apps is really you just need a Java, anything that can compile Java. So any open source DevOps tool or any DevOps tool or CI/CD tool that can run Java, you can compile an Android application and end up with an APK. Fastlane is also a good tool. Thanks, Akif. For iOS, though, you do need to compile on a Mac. I know GitHub Actions and Azure Pipelines allow you to run on hosted Macs, so you can just run on a Mac and compile your iOS application on a Mac, hosted runner. Or if you have your own Mac, you can run your own self-hosted runner as well. So you should be able to do it really with any tool that can run Java compiles or Android compiles, and then any Mac that can run the iOS stuff. But yes, I don't know I don't have any great tools off the top of my head. I'm sorry.
That's right. We're going to go from one specific question to an even more specific question. So let's just see if we can get an answer here. I have a GitHub GraphQL query for workflow and workflow run object. The query needs the node ID of the workflow and the workflow run respectively. REST API gives node ID, but not able to find how to get the node ID of a workflow or workflow run with GraphQL. Any help there? That's a very specific question.
Let me just quickly, and I'm going to try and multitask here as well. I would. So my immediate reaction for this one is, I don't know the answer, but where I would look for that answer is by looking at the GitHub docs, and there's a reference section for the GraphQL API, which should give you ultimately, I guess, the schema of the the queries that you can run in GraphQL. So I'm just having a quick look to see whether there's an easy one here. So it's workflow. Nodes, and then So I'm going to give you the URL that I'm looking at, but I think it would take me a little bit of time to actually hunt it down. However, I do know that the GraphQL, so whenever I've worked with that GraphQL API, occasionally I come across something that is not there, or I don't think I can find. If you wanted to ping me directly, I can hunt it down a little bit more, or at least speak to the actions team to see whether that should be there. My guess is it should. So either it'd be somewhere, or or it is a thing that's missing. But yeah, if you could ping me directly, that would be, I can hunt that down.
All right, thank you very much. The next one, Damien, you've been involved in the developer landscape for quite a few years, both in Australia and internationally. Do you have any examples you could share with us of organisations that have got DevOps wrong? And what lessons should people on the webinar learn from that?
So yes, I've worked with plenty of companies that have got it wrong, and I'm not going to name any for obvious reasons. But I think there's a couple of patterns that emerge when companies are, I guess, doing DevOps wrong. One that springs to mind that happens a little bit is treating DevOps like a new department or a new silo. So DevOps was kind of created to align developers and operations. And so the idea was that devs and ops would work together to end up releasing software into production. What a lot of companies do, though, is they see DevOps, or they implement DevOps, I guess, as the team that's in between developers and operations. So developers will write all the code, and then they'll work with DevOps or with the DevOps department to work out how to deploy that code and automate the scripts and things like that. And then the DevOps team does that deployment, and then the operations team, make sure the infrastructure is there. And, if there's issues that happen over the weekends, then they're the ones who are on call, and then it has to go somehow back to the developers. Ultimately, that is, rather than taking two silos and putting them together so everybody works together, it's just putting another silo in the middle. So that is a really common pattern. And unfortunately, you see that a lot. If you're in an organization that has a DevOps department, or, a team that does all the DevOps, you're not really doing it correctly, right? You've introduced a new silo, like a new team that doesn't communicate well with the other teams. There's a really good quote from, I think it was a guy, Timo Mahaladov, which I loved, which is basically, I'm going to try and quote it. I've got it written here. Having a DevOps person in your organization that does all the DevOps is like having a collaboration person who does all the collaboration. Right? It doesn't really make sense. It's a DevOps is about a team effort, like about a group of people working together with a common goal rather than an organization. So yes, if you have a DevOps team that does all of the DevOps, that's not really the point. That said, you can have a DevOps team that provides kind of a center of excellence. So they are the ones who understand the products really deeply, and can give advice on how to automate certain things or how to monitor what's happening in production. But if they're the ones doing all the work, then you don't get that ownership, which we were talking about before. And you don't get that kind of that culture of this is work that I've done and I'm trying to get the right result for the customer. So yeah, that's what I would say is usually the case when organizations aren't doing it correctly. Is when they have a new DevOps department, or just rename ops to the DevOps department, but it's exactly the same as it was before.
Yeah. All right, we've got time for one final question that just came in. Most people assume that they follow DevOps after setting up CICD. Doesn't DevOps cover the whole life cycle, or is it only about automating build and deployment?
Yeah, definitely. It should, in my mind, cover everything from an idea, and that's even gathering ideas or gathering feedback from customers, all the way through to running in production and then feeding back the information that you have in production back to that life cycle. So I don't know whether you've seen, there's like a figure eight, sideways figure eight, like an infinity sign diagram that people see, talk about a lot when it comes to DevOps. That simplifies it a bit. Obviously, there's just like plan, develop, test, deploy, and then go all the way around. But DevOps ideally should cover everything that you care about with that product, all the way from idea to production and back again. So there's a common strategy of a common thing that happens where DevSecOps is a perfect example where they're like, oh, we were doing DevOps, but we didn't do security as part of that. So we're going to create this new thing called DevSecOps. Security should have been part of it. Like you're adding an additional, syllable into DevOps where that syllable should have been part of what you were doing anyway. I've seen efforts to add marketing in there or to add, UI in that DevOps acronym or DevOps abbreviation. If these are things you care about with the delivery of your software to your customers, then they should be part of that process. So yes, I totally agree with that statement that it should be about the entire lifecycle. It should be about everything from idea to production and feeding back into those ideas as well. So yeah, 100% with you there.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to join us today. Hopefully, by the sounds of it, you've certainly had a lot of experience in the DevOps arena based on some of those questions and the answers that you've had there for us. So it's been an absolute pleasure, Damien. We might go back to the slides and get people excited about tomorrow's InFocus session.
Yeah, definitely. Let me just share this again. We are on the poll, which is not what we want. We want this one.
Oh, that looks pretty good. Excellent. So join us tomorrow. So the session tomorrow is building a frictionless application security program. I know Shlomi really, really well and Fat and PG. The team is just fantastic. So if you've enjoyed the session today and you want to know more about the security side of things, then this is definitely well worth joining us for. And the last thing there that I'll just share on the next slide, just as we wrap up here, folks, if you'd like to dive deeper on anything that we've covered here today, just click on Request a Demo button in the top right-hand corner, and the team will get in touch with you shortly. And lastly, if you just take a minute or two to complete a short survey about your experience with us today, you'll find the link to that survey in the Documents tab on the right of your screen and in the chat. We designed this program for you, and we want to be sure that you're getting the most value out of your time here with us. We do take your feedback seriously, and our learnings are important to optimize our future programs to continue to raise the bar for you. So don't be shy. Please tell us what you think. And with that note, my final thanks again, Damien. It's been a pleasure. Thanks, Daniel, in the chat there for all your wonderful support there. And thanks for joining us here today at InFocus.
Thank you.